The knock on my door came at exactly 7:45 in the morning, and I knew before opening it that this was going to be a problem. I had just gotten home 3 hours earlier from a midnight rescue call where old Mr. Henderson had fallen and couldn't get up in his bathroom, and I was running on fumes. My name is Zachary Lawson, and I'm the only certified paramedic and emergency medical technician living in Pinewood Ridge, a small mountain community tucked away in the Colorado Rockies, about 40 miles west of Boulder. When I opened the door, a woman in her late 40s stood there with a clipboard, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, wearing a pristine white puffer jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Zachary Lawson?" she asked, even though she clearly knew who I was. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Hutchins, the president of the Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association. I need to discuss a serious violation of our community guidelines with you." She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed past me into my living room, her eyes scanning everything like she was cataloging evidence for a trial. I closed the door, suppressing a yawn. "What violation?" Patricia turned to face me, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Multiple residents have reported that you've been operating a loud motorized vehicle at all hours of the night, disturbing the peace and violating our noise ordinance. Specifically, you've been seen using a snowmobile between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. on no fewer than 15 occasions in the past 2 months." I rubbed my eyes, trying to wake up enough to deal with this. "Mrs. Hutchins, I use my Snowmachine to respond to medical emergencies. I'm an EMT and paramedic. When someone in this community needs help and the roads are snowed in, which happens pretty much every other day up here in January, I'm the one who goes to help them." "That's irrelevant to the HOA guidelines," Patricia said, not missing a beat. Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that no recreational vehicles, including but not limited to snowmobiles, dirt bikes, or ATVs, may be operated within community boundaries between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The fine for each violation is $250. Recreational. I stared at her. "Did you not hear what I just said? I'm responding to emergencies. People's lives are at stake." "The guidelines make no exception for personal business activities," she replied, adjusting her grip on the clipboard. "You've accumulated 15 violations at $250 each, which comes to $3,750. Payment is due within 30 days, or we'll be forced to place a lien on your property." I felt my blood pressure rising. This is insane. Last week, I used my Snowmachine to get to the Martinelli house when their daughter was having an allergic reaction. The week before that, I helped Mrs. Chen when she was having chest pains. These aren't recreational trips, and they're definitely not business activities. I'm a volunteer emergency responder. Patricia's expression didn't change. "Perhaps you should consider living closer to the people you serve, or they should consider moving to an area with better emergency access. That's not the HOA's problem. Our responsibility is to maintain property values and ensure all residents comply with the guidelines they agreed to when they purchased their homes. I signed those guidelines 5 years ago, and I don't remember anything about emergency medical response being banned." "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for breaking them, Mr. Lawson." She pulled a stack of papers from her clipboard and set them on my coffee table. "This is your formal notice of violation and the payment schedule. You have 30 days to remit payment in full, or we can discuss a payment plan at the next HOA board meeting. Additionally, you are hereby ordered to cease all snowmobile operation during prohibited hours immediately, effective today. Any future violations will result in additional fines and potential legal action. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. I understand you may feel this is unfair, but rules exist for a reason. Several residents have complained about the noise disrupting their sleep. Mrs. Vandermeer said the sound of your snowmobile woke her up at 2 in the morning just last Tuesday. That was when I was heading to help her neighbor, Tom Bradley, who was having a diabetic emergency, I said, my voice tight. He could have died. Then Mr. Bradley should have been more careful about managing his condition, Patricia said. Or he should call proper emergency services. The proper emergency services can't get up here when there's 3 feet of snow on the ground and the plows haven't come through yet. That's why I do this. That's why the county actually relies on me to be the first responder for this area. Patricia shrugged. That sounds like a problem for the county to solve, not an excuse to violate HOA regulations. Good day, Mr. Lawson. She left, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the stack of papers on my coffee table, trying to process what had just happened. Then I picked up my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who worked as a sheriff's deputy in Boulder County. Marcus? Yeah, it's Zach. I need to ask you something about HOA regulations and emergency response. We talked for about 20 minutes, and what he told me wasn't encouraging. According to Marcus, HOAs in Colorado had broad authority to enforce their covenants and restrictions. And while there were some exceptions carved out in state law for things like flying the American flag or installing solar panels, there wasn't anything specific about emergency response vehicles. He suggested I talk to a lawyer, but lawyers cost money I didn't have, especially not with a $3,750 fine hanging over my head. I spent the rest of the day trying to catch up on sleep, but my mind kept churning. Pinewood Ridge was a community of about 200 homes scattered across 5 square miles of mountainous terrain. The nearest ambulance station was in Nederland, which was a good 30-minute drive away in perfect conditions, but could easily take an hour or more when the weather was bad. The county had recognized this problem and had actually helped pay for my advanced EMT training 3 years ago on the understanding that I'd serve as a volunteer first responder for the area. I had a medical kit, oxygen tanks, a defibrillator, and all the training necessary to stabilize patients until the ambulance could arrive. And in winter, when the roads were often impassable, my Snowmachine was the only way to reach people in time. That night, at 11:15, my emergency radio crackled to life. Any units available for a medical emergency at 2847 Aspen Grove Trail. Reporting party states her husband is having severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. I grabbed the radio. This is Lawson. I'm 5 minutes out by Snowmachine. What's the patient's age and medical history? The dispatcher gave me the details. 68-year-old male, history of heart disease, currently experiencing crushing chest pain radiating down his left arm. Classic heart attack symptoms. The address was for Robert and Helen Kaufman, a retired couple I'd met a few times at community events. I looked out my window at the fresh snow falling. The roads wouldn't be plowed until morning. If I took my truck, it would take me 20 minutes to get there, maybe longer, and I might get stuck. If I took my Snowmachine, I'd be there in 5 minutes. Time mattered with a heart attack. Every minute increased the risk of permanent heart damage or death. I thought about Patricia Hutchins and her clipboard and her $250 fine. Then I thought about Robert Kaufman clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. It wasn't really a choice at all. I grabbed my medical bag, pulled on my insulated gear, and headed to my garage. My Snowmachine was a Polaris Titan, built for utility rather than recreation. I had modified it with a large storage compartment on the back for my medical equipment and installed high-powered LED lights for night operations. I started it up, the engine roaring to life in the quiet night, and headed out into the snow. The ride to the Kaufman house took 6 minutes instead of 5 because the snow was coming down hard and visibility was poor. I pulled up to their front door and grabbed my bag. Helen Kaufman opened the door before I could knock, her face pale with fear. "He's in the bedroom," she said. I gave him an aspirin like they say on TV. "Good, that was the right thing to do," I told her, following her through the house. Robert Kaufman was lying on the bed, his face gray and covered in sweat. His breathing was labored and shallow. I immediately went to work, checking his vitals, hooking him up to my portable EKG monitor, and starting him on oxygen. The EKG showed what I'd suspected: he was having an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. I gave him nitroglycerin under his tongue and called the dispatcher back. "This is Lawson on scene at the Kaufman residence. Patient is having an active MI. I need an ambulance here as soon as possible, but the roads are bad. I've administered aspirin, oxygen, and nitro. Vitals are stabilizing, but he needs transport to a cardiac center immediately." The dispatcher confirmed the ambulance was en route, but estimated 45 minutes due to road conditions. I stayed with Robert, monitoring his condition, adjusting his oxygen and keeping him calm. Helen sat beside the bed, holding her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do, I was so scared." "You did great calling right away," I assured her. "That's what saved him." The ambulance arrived 52 minutes later. By then, Robert's condition had stabilized enough that the paramedics were able to transport him safely. They'd take him to Boulder Community Health, where the cardiac team would be waiting. As I packed up my equipment and prepared to head home, Helen Kaufman grabbed my arm. "I heard Patricia Hutchins was giving you trouble about your snowmobile," she said. "That's ridiculous. You just saved my husband's life. If you'd had to drive here, if you'd waited because of some stupid rule, Robert might be dead right now. Don't worry about it, Mrs. Kaufman. You just focus on your husband. No, I'm going to say something at the next HOA meeting. This is wrong." I thanked her and headed back out into the snow. The ride home was cold and exhausting, and when I finally made it back to my house at 1:30 in the morning, all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But as I was putting my snow machine away in the garage, I noticed something that made my stomach sink. There was a car parked across the street, and sitting in the driver's seat with her phone pointed at my garage was Patricia Hutchins. She'd been waiting to catch me violating her precious noise ordinance. She'd literally sat out in the cold in the middle of the night just to document me breaking the rules. I stared at her for a long moment, and she stared back, then deliberately made a show of typing something on her phone. Then she started her car and drove away. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA. It contained 3 photos, time-stamped at 11:18 p.m., 11:24 p.m., and 1:37 a.m., showing me leaving and returning on my snow machine. The email informed me that I had violated the noise ordinance again, and that an additional $250 fine had been added to my account. My total due was now $4,000. I called Marcus again. "They're literally stalking me to catch me responding to emergencies." "This is crazy." "It is crazy," Marcus agreed. "But legally, they might be within their rights. The HOA covenants are a contract you signed when you bought the house. If the covenant says no snowmobiles after 10 p.m. and you signed it, you're bound by it, even for medical emergencies." Colorado law does have provisions protecting emergency responders from liability, but I don't know if that extends to HOA regulations. You really need to talk to a lawyer, Zach. I spent the afternoon researching attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. The consultations alone were expensive, and every lawyer I spoke to said the same thing: HOA cases were complicated, time-consuming, and expensive to litigate. Most of them suggested I try to work it out with the board directly, maybe request a variance or an exception to the rules. So that's what I tried to do. I sent a formal letter to the HOA board explaining my situation, providing documentation of my credentials as a certified paramedic and EMT, including letters from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office and the Netherlands Ambulance Service confirming my role as a volunteer first responder, and requesting a variance to allow me to operate my Snowmachine during emergency responses, regardless of the time. The response came back 5 days later. Request denied. The board felt that granting me an exception would set a precedent that could lead to other residents requesting similar variances, and that maintaining consistent enforcement of the rules was essential to preserving property values. They suggested I consider purchasing a property outside the HOA boundaries if I needed to operate a snowmobile for work purposes. I'd lived in Pinewood Ridge for 5 years. I'd chosen this location specifically because it was centrally positioned within the mountain communities I served. Moving wasn't a realistic option, both financially and practically. And beyond that, it was the principle of the thing. What they were asking me to do was choose between helping people in medical emergencies and complying with an HOA rule about noise. 2 nights later, at 10:48 p.m., my radio went off again. Medical emergency at 1523 Pine Mountain Road. Reporting party states his wife is in active labor and they can't get to the hospital, requesting immediate assistance. I knew that address. David and Sarah Thompson, a young couple expecting their first baby. Sarah wasn't due for another 3 weeks, but babies don't always follow schedules. Pine Mountain Road was on the far end of the community, a steep, winding route that would be treacherous in the dark with fresh snow. By truck, it would take me 25 minutes minimum. By Snowmachine, I could be there in 8. I grabbed my obstetric kit. I wasn't a midwife, but I delivered 2 babies during my years as a paramedic and had the training to handle emergency childbirth. I pulled on my gear and started toward the garage, then hesitated. If I took the Snowmachine, that would be another $250 fine. If Patricia Hutchins was watching again, maybe more photos, more documentation. The total fine would be up to $4,250. But a woman was in labor, possibly with complications, unable to reach a hospital. I grabbed my keys and headed to my truck instead. Maybe I could make it work. The drive was a nightmare. The snow was deep and the road hadn't been plowed. My truck, even with 4-wheel drive and snow tires, struggled with the steep grades and sharp turns. At one point, I nearly slid off the road entirely. It took me 33 minutes to reach the Thompson house, and when I got there, David Thompson met me at the door, his face frantic. "She's in the bedroom. The contractions are 2 minutes apart. I don't know what to do." I rushed inside and found Sarah Thompson in bed, her face red and strained. I did a quick assessment and my heart sank. The baby was crowning. She was going to deliver right now, and there was no way to get her to a hospital. This was happening here whether we were ready or not. "Okay, Sarah, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. "You're doing great. I'm going to help you deliver this baby right here and everything is going to be fine. David, I need you to get me clean towels, lots of them, and a large bowl of warm water." The next 20 minutes were intense. Sarah was a trooper, following my instructions, breathing through the contractions, pushing when I told her to push. David stood beside her, holding her hand, looking like he might pass out at any moment. But at 11:37 p.m., their daughter entered the world, letting out a strong, healthy cry that filled the room. I clamped and cut the umbilical cord, suctioned the baby's mouth and nose, and handed the tiny, wriggling infant to Sarah, who burst into tears. "She's beautiful," Sarah sobbed, holding her daughter against her chest. "She's perfect." "She is perfect," I agreed, monitoring both mother and baby. "But we still need to get you both to a hospital for proper checkup and care. Let me call for an ambulance." The ambulance took another 40 minutes to arrive, but by then I delivered the placenta, ensured Sarah wasn't hemorrhaging, and confirmed that both mother and baby were stable. The paramedics loaded them both carefully into the ambulance, and David Thompson followed in his car. Before he left, he shook my hand so hard I thought he might break it. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't come, if you hadn't known what to do, I don't know what would have happened. Thank you so much." I drove home slowly, exhausted but feeling good about the night's work. I'd helped bring a new life into the world. That was what being a paramedic was all about. When I pulled into my driveway at 1:23 a.m., I saw the email notification on my phone before I even got out of the truck. Patricia Hutchins had sent another message to the HOA board, copying me. In it, she noted that while I hadn't violated the snowmobile ordinance that night, I had violated a different provision of the HOA covenants, specifically the rule against operating a home-based business without prior board approval. She argued that since I was providing medical services, even as a volunteer, I was conducting business activities from my home and using community roads for commercial purposes. She was requesting the board investigate and determine appropriate fines. I sat in my truck, staring at the email, and felt something inside me snap. This wasn't about noise ordinances or property values. This was personal. Patricia Hutchins had decided she didn't like what I was doing, and she was going to use every tool at her disposal to make my life difficult. The next morning, I drove down to Nederland and met with Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Chen at a coffee shop. I told him everything that had happened, showed him the emails and the fine notices, and asked him what options I had. Marcus listened carefully, sipping his coffee and taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "This is a tough one, Zach. Legally, HOAs have a lot of power, but there might be an angle here. You're not just some random guy with a snowmobile. You're a certified emergency responder working in coordination with county emergency services. The county has an interest in making sure you can do your job. What does that mean practically? It means I'm going to talk to my boss, and we're going to talk to the county attorney. If the county can make the case that you're providing an essential emergency service that benefits the public, they might be able to intervene on your behalf. No promises, but it's worth a shot." "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate it. Don't thank me yet." Even if the county backs you up, the HOA might not care. They could still fine you, still try to put a lien on your property. This could get ugly. He was right. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the Pinewood Ridge HOA. The board had voted to uphold all existing fines and had added an additional fine of $500 for operating an unapproved home-based business. My total owed was now $4,750, due within 21 days. If I failed to pay, the HOA would file a lien against my property and could eventually force a sale to recover the debt. I also received a cease and desist letter, ordering me to immediately stop all emergency medical response activities originating from my home or using community roads. The letter stated that any future violations would result in additional fines of $500 per incident and possible legal action seeking a court injunction. I called Marcus. They're trying to stop me from responding to emergencies at all now. Can they do that? I don't think so, but it's complicated. I talked to the county attorney and she's interested in your case. She wants to meet with you. Can you come down to Boulder tomorrow? The next day, I drove to the Boulder County offices and met with Assistant County Attorney Jennifer Walsh. She was a sharp woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a business suit, with a stack of legal books and printouts on her desk. "Mr. Lawson, Deputy Chen briefed me on your situation," she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "I've reviewed the HOA covenants for Pinewood Ridge, and I've also looked at Colorado state law regarding emergency services. Here's where we stand. The HOA does have broad authority to enforce their covenants, and those covenants do contain provisions about noise and home-based businesses. However, there's a potential conflict with state law." "What kind of conflict?" "Colorado has several statutes protecting emergency responders and ensuring access to emergency medical services. One of them, CRS 295104, prohibits local governments from adopting regulations that interfere with emergency medical services. Now, an HOA isn't technically a government entity, but there's legal precedent suggesting that when an HOA exercises governmental-type powers, like regulating land use and imposing fines, they can be subject to similar restrictions. So they can't stop me from responding to emergencies." "Potentially, but it's never been tested in this specific context. We'd have to take it to court to find out for sure. The other angle is that you're operating in cooperation with county emergency services. The county has designated you as an official volunteer first responder. We have an interest in making sure you can perform that function." "What does that mean for me right now?" Jennifer Walsh leaned forward. "It means the county is willing to back you up. We're going to send a letter to the Pinewood Ridge HOA board informing them that you're acting as an authorized county emergency responder, and that any regulations that interfere with your ability to respond to emergencies may be in violation of state law. We're going to request they rescind the fines and provide you with a permanent exemption for emergency response activities." "Will that work? Honestly, I don't know. Some HOAs back down when they get a letter from a county attorney. Others dig in and fight. If they fight, this could end up in court, which could take months or even years to resolve. I don't have months or years. They want $4,750 in 3 weeks, or they're putting a lien on my house. We can potentially get a temporary injunction blocking them from collecting while the case is pending. But Mr. Lawson, I need you to understand something. If we go down this road, it's going to be a fight. The HOA will hire lawyers. They'll argue that their covenants are sacred and that allowing exceptions opens the door to chaos. It's going to be stressful and time-consuming. What's my alternative? Let them fine me into bankruptcy. Stop helping people who need medical care." Jennifer Walsh smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let's fight this." The county attorney's letter went out the next day. It was 3 pages of dense legal language, but the core message was clear. Zachary Lawson was operating as an authorized volunteer emergency medical responder for Boulder County. His activities served a critical public safety function, and any HOA regulations that interfered with emergency medical services were potentially unenforceable under Colorado law. The letter requested that the Pinewood Ridge HOA board immediately rescind all fines against me and grant a permanent exemption for emergency response activities. The HOA's response came 4 days later. It was written by an attorney named Richard Pemberton from a Denver law firm that specialized in HOA representation. The letter was polite but firm. The HOA board rejected the county's position entirely. They argued that HOA covenants were private contracts between homeowners, that I had voluntarily agreed to those covenants when I purchased my home, and that the county had no authority to override those private agreements. They further argued that the state law regarding emergency medical services applied only to governmental regulations, not private HOA rules. The fine stood, and if I didn't pay within the remaining time frame, they would proceed with placing a lien on my property. Jennifer Walsh read the response and shook her head. They're going to fight this. Okay, we need to file for a temporary restraining order to block them from collecting the fines while we litigate the underlying issue. How long will this take? The TRO hearing will probably be within a week or two. After that, if we get it, we'll be looking at several months for a full trial on the merits. Maybe longer. The TRO hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which meant I had to survive that long without paying the fines and without the HOA taking action against my property. It also meant I had to decide whether to keep responding to emergencies, knowing that each response would add another $500 fine to my tab. I decided I didn't really have a choice. 5 nights after receiving the HOA's rejection letter, my radio crackled at 11:53 p.m. Any units available for a fall injury at 3901 Summit Ridge Drive. Reporting party states her mother has fallen and is unconscious. Summit Ridge Drive was in the high part of Pinewood Ridge, accessible only by a narrow, steep road that was definitely not plowed at midnight. I grabbed my gear, jumped on my Snowmachine, and raced through the snow. The ride took 9 minutes, and when I arrived, I found a woman in her 70s lying at the bottom of a staircase inside her home, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Her daughter, a woman in her 40s, was kneeling beside her, sobbing. I immediately went to work, stabilizing her neck, checking her vitals, and treating the head wound. She was breathing but unresponsive. Possible traumatic brain injury, possible spinal injury. This was serious. I called for an ambulance and a helicopter, and then did everything I could to keep her stable until help arrived. The helicopter landed in a cleared field nearby 28 minutes later, and the flight paramedics took over, transporting her to a trauma center in Denver. As I was packing up my equipment, I noticed a car parked down the street with its lights off. I walked closer, and sure enough, there was Patricia Hutchins, sitting in her car with her phone out, documenting my presence. She saw me looking at her and held up her phone, making sure I saw her taking photos. I walked over to her car and tapped on the window. She rolled it down halfway. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Documenting HOA violations," she said calmly. "You've violated the noise ordinance again, and you've violated the cease and desist order. That's another $1,000 in fines. That woman could have died. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the rules. You agreed to follow the covenants when you moved here." "You're not above the law, Mr. Lawson." "I'm not above the law, but I am trying to save lives. Don't you understand that?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "I understand that rules exist for a reason. If we start making exceptions for one person, everyone will want exceptions. The covenants are what protect our property values and our quality of life. I'm sorry you don't like them, but you should have thought about that before you bought here. Why are you doing this? Why are you sitting out here in the cold in the middle of the night just to catch me helping people?" "Because someone has to enforce the rules. The board elected me president because I'm willing to do what needs to be done to maintain standards. Most people are too weak to stand up for what's right." I stared at her for a long moment. "You know what? I feel sorry for you. You're so obsessed with your rules and your property values that you can't see the human beings right in front of you. That woman I just helped, she's your neighbor. She lives 3 houses down from you. And you're sitting here worried about the noise from my snowmobile instead of worried about whether she's going to survive. Patricia rolled her window back up without responding and drove away. I stood there in the snow, watching her taillights disappear, and felt a cold anger settle in my chest. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was about basic human decency, and Patricia Hutchins had none. The next day, I received another email. $1,000 in fines added to my account. Total owed, $5,750. The email also informed me that the HOA board was considering additional legal action, including seeking a court injunction to prohibit me from operating my Snowmachine within community boundaries. Jennifer Walsh called me that afternoon. I saw the new fines. Don't worry about them. We're going to include everything in the TRO petition. The hearing is set for Friday morning at 9 a.m. in Boulder County District Court. I need you to be there to testify. Friday morning, I put on the only suit I owned and drove to the Boulder County Courthouse. The hearing was in a small courtroom on the 2nd floor. Jennifer Walsh was there, along with another attorney from the county. On the other side of the room sat Richard Pemberton, the HOA's lawyer, along with Patricia Hutchins and 2 other HOA board members. The judge was a woman named Sandra Martinez, and she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else than refereeing an HOA dispute on a Friday morning. Jennifer Walsh presented our case first, explaining my role as a volunteer emergency responder, the critical public safety function I served, and the conflict between the HOA's restrictions and state law regarding emergency medical services. She argued that the fines were unreasonable, and that enforcing them would endanger the lives of Pinewood Ridge residents. Richard Pemberton countered that HOA covenants were sacred private contracts, that I had knowingly and voluntarily agreed to them, and that the county had no business interfering with private agreements between homeowners. He argued that if I didn't like the rules, I should move somewhere else, and that granting me an exception would undermine the entire structure of HOA governance. Then it was time for testimony. I took the stand, and Jennifer Walsh walked me through my qualifications, my training, my role with Boulder County Emergency Services, and specific examples of emergencies I'd responded to. I talked about Robert Kaufman's heart attack, Sarah Thompson's emergency childbirth, and the elderly woman who'd fallen down the stairs. I explained that in each case, my Snowmachine had allowed me to reach the patient far faster than would have been possible by truck, and that in each case, that speed had potentially saved a life. Richard Pemberton cross-examined me, trying to suggest that the emergencies weren't really emergencies, that other options were available, and that my real motive was to avoid following rules I didn't like. I kept my cool and answered each question honestly, but it was frustrating to have someone who'd never responded to a medical emergency question my judgment about what constituted a life-threatening situation. Then, Patricia Hutchins took the stand. Pemberton asked her about the noise complaints, and she launched into a detailed account of how my snowmobile had disrupted the peace and quiet of Pinewood Ridge, how multiple residents had complained about being woken up in the middle of the night, and how property values would suffer if people thought they'd be subjected to constant noise. Jennifer Walsh's cross-examination was brutal. "Mrs. Hutchins, are you aware that Mr. Lawson responded to a medical emergency at your neighbor's home just last week? I'm aware he was at a neighboring property, yes. And you're aware that your neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had fallen and was unconscious. I heard about that, yes. But rather than checking on your neighbor, rather than offering to help, you sat in your car and took photographs to document an HOA violation. Patricia hesitated. I was ensuring compliance with community guidelines. Mrs. Hutchins, how many times have you personally needed emergency medical assistance in the past 5 years? I don't see how that's relevant. Please answer the question. Twice. Once for a fall and once for a possible stroke that turned out to be a migraine. And on both occasions, who responded to help you? Patricia's face went slightly red. Mr. Lawson did. So when you needed help, you were grateful to have a trained emergency responder living nearby who could reach you quickly. That doesn't change the fact that he violated the covenants. Mrs. Hutchins, do you understand that if Mr. Lawson is prohibited from using his Snowmachine for emergency responses, people in your community could die? That's an exaggeration. People can call 911 like everyone else. Even when ambulances can't reach them for an hour or more due to snow, they can wait. They can wait. Jennifer Walsh's voice rose slightly. Mrs. Hutchins, are you seriously suggesting that someone having a heart attack should just wait an hour for an ambulance, rather than letting Mr. Lawson reach them in 5 minutes? I'm suggesting that Mr. Lawson should follow the rules he agreed to follow. Judge Martinez interrupted. Thank you, that's sufficient. Let's move on. The hearing lasted about 3 hours in total. When it was over, Judge Martinez said she'd take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 7 days. We left the courthouse, and Jennifer Walsh seemed cautiously optimistic. I think it went well, she said. The judge seemed sympathetic to our position, but you never know with these things. The ruling came down 5 days later. Judge Martinez granted a temporary restraining order blocking the HOA from collecting the fines or placing a lien on my property while the underlying case was litigated. She also issued a preliminary injunction preventing the HOA from adding new fines related to emergency response activities. However, she stopped short of declaring the HOA covenants unenforceable, saying that issue would need to be determined at a full trial. It was a partial victory, but it bought us time. The trial was scheduled for 4 months out in early May. In the meantime, I could keep responding to emergencies without fear of losing my house. Patricia Hutchins wasn't happy about the ruling. 2 days after it was issued, she called an emergency HOA board meeting and sent a notice to all residents. The notice stated that due to one resident's refusal to comply with community guidelines, the HOA was being forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, which would necessitate a special assessment on all homeowners of $500 each to cover the costs. The notice also included a paragraph about me, describing me as a scofflaw who thought he was above the rules and who was costing the entire community money because of his selfish behavior. It was a transparent attempt to turn the neighborhood against me, and to some extent, it worked. I started getting dirty looks from neighbors when I drove through the community. Someone spray painted "Follow the Rules" on my garage door. Another person left a nasty note on my truck calling me an entitled jerk, but not everyone turned against me. Helen Kaufman, whose husband I'd helped during his heart attack, started a petition in support of me. She went door to door, explaining what I did and why it mattered, and collected signatures from over 100 residents asking the HOA board to drop the case and grant me an exemption. David and Sarah Thompson wrote a letter to the board describing how I'd delivered their baby and potentially saved both mother and child. Other people I'd helped over the years came forward with their own stories. The local newspaper in Nederland picked up the story, running an article titled "HOA vs. Paramedic, Community divided over emergency response. The article presented both sides, quoting Patricia Hutchins about the importance of maintaining rules and property values, and quoting me about the need to save lives. The article also included comments from several Pinewood Ridge residents, and the split was clear. Some people agreed with Patricia that rules were rules, and I should follow them or move. Others thought the HOA was being ridiculous and endangering lives over noise complaints. The story got picked up by a local TV news station in Denver, and suddenly, I was doing interviews explaining my situation to a wider audience. The news coverage was mostly sympathetic to my position, which helped, but it also ratcheted up the pressure. Patricia Hutchins doubled down, doing her own TV interviews where she portrayed herself as a defender of property rights and accused me of grandstanding for attention. Through all of this, I kept doing my job. The calls kept coming, and I kept responding. A teenager with a snowboarding accident. An elderly man with pneumonia. A woman having a severe asthma attack. Each time my radio went off, I grabbed my gear and went, sometimes by truck, sometimes by Snowmachine, depending on the conditions and the urgency. And each time, I wondered if Patricia Hutchins was out there somewhere, watching and documenting. As the trial date approached, Jennifer Walsh and her team prepared our case. They gathered testimony from emergency medicine experts who would explain why rapid response times mattered. They compiled statistics on ambulance response times in mountain communities. They collected letters from dozens of Pinewood Ridge residents supporting me. They built a comprehensive argument that the HOA's restrictions were not only unreasonable but actively dangerous. The HOA prepared their own case, arguing about property rights, the sanctity of private contracts, and the chaos that would ensue if every homeowner could ignore rules they didn't like. They gathered their own testimony from residents who complained about noise, and from property value experts who argued that allowing commercial activities and exemptions to the covenants would harm home prices. 3 weeks before the trial, something happened that changed everything. It was 2:15 in the morning when my radio went off. Emergency at 742 Oakmont Circle. Reporting party states his wife is having difficulty breathing and is unresponsive. I recognized the address immediately. It was Patricia Hutchins' house. I grabbed my gear and jumped on my Snowmachine. The ride took 4 minutes through fresh snow. When I arrived, Patricia's husband, George Hutchins, met me at the door. He was in his pajamas, his face pale with panic. "It's Patricia," he said. "She can't breathe, something's wrong." I found Patricia in their bedroom, sitting up in bed, gasping for air. Her lips were blue. Her oxygen saturation was dangerously low. She was having a severe asthma attack or possibly anaphylaxis. I didn't waste time asking questions. I immediately started her on high-flow oxygen, gave her nebulized albuterol for her airways, and prepared an epinephrine injection in case it was anaphylaxis. "Patricia, can you hear me? Nod if you can hear me." She nodded weakly, her eyes wide with fear. "You're going to be okay. I'm giving you medicine to help you breathe. Just try to stay calm." I administered the epinephrine and continued the oxygen. Gradually, over the next few minutes, her breathing started to improve. Her oxygen saturation climbed from a dangerous 78% to a much safer 94%. Her color improved. The panic in her eyes started to fade. George stood beside the bed, holding his wife's hand, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he kept saying. "Thank you so much." The ambulance arrived 18 minutes later. By then, Patricia was stable enough to talk, though she was still shaky and weak. The paramedics confirmed my assessment and treatment, loaded her onto a stretcher, and transported her to the hospital for further evaluation and monitoring. As they were wheeling her out, Patricia looked at me. Our eyes met for a long moment. I couldn't read her expression. Then she was gone, loaded into the ambulance, and I was left standing in her living room with George. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come so fast," George said. "The ambulance took almost 20 minutes. If you hadn't been here, if you'd had to drive instead of taking your snowmobile, I don't think she would have made it." I packed up my equipment in silence. There wasn't much to say. I'd done what I always did: respond to someone in need and provide the best care I could. It didn't matter that the person was Patricia Hutchins, the woman who'd been making my life hell for months. When someone needed help, I helped them. That was the job. The next morning, I received an email from Richard Pemberton, the HOA's attorney. It was brief and formal. The email stated that the Pinewood Ridge HOA board had voted to drop all fines against me, and to grant me a permanent exemption from the noise ordinance and home-based business restrictions for the purpose of emergency medical response activities. The special assessment against other homeowners would be rescinded. The lawsuit was being withdrawn. Case closed. There was no apology, no explanation, just a dry legal notice that the matter was resolved. But I knew what had happened. Patricia Hutchins had nearly died, and I'd saved her life using the exact Snowmachine she'd been trying to ban me from using. She'd been forced to confront the reality that her crusade against my emergency responses wasn't about property values or noise complaints. It was about power and control. And when her own life had hung in the balance, when she'd been the one gasping for air and facing death, suddenly the rules hadn't seemed so important. I forwarded the email to Jennifer Walsh, who called me immediately. "This is incredible news, Zach. Congratulations. Thanks for all your help. I couldn't have fought this without you. You did the right thing, standing up for yourself and for the people you serve. I'm proud of you." The story didn't end quite there. 2 days later, Patricia Hutchins called me. Her voice was quiet, subdued, nothing like the sharp, authoritative tone I'd always heard before. "Mr. Lawson, this is Patricia Hutchins. I wanted to talk to you." "How are you feeling?" I asked. "I'm okay. The doctors said it was a severe allergic reaction. They're still not sure what triggered it, but they told me that if you hadn't been there so quickly, if you hadn't known what to do, I probably would have died." "I'm glad I could help." There was a long pause. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I was so focused on enforcing the rules, on maintaining control, that I didn't see what really mattered. You've been saving lives, and I was trying to stop you because of noise complaints. That was wrong. I'm sorry." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Hutchins. I'm stepping down as HOA president. I've realized I'm not the right person for the job, and I'm going to propose at the next board meeting that we create a formal exception in the covenants for emergency response activities. Not just for you, but as a general principle. Because you were right. Saving lives is more important than rules about snowmobiles." "That sounds like a good idea. Mr. Lawson, I know this doesn't make up for what I put you through. I know I cost you time and stress and probably money. But I want you to know that I understand now, and I'm grateful. You saved my life, even after everything I did to you. That's the kind of person you are, and that's the kind of person this community needs." We talked for a few more minutes and then ended the call. I sat there for a while, processing the conversation. It wasn't a Hollywood ending where the villain has a complete transformation and becomes a hero. Patricia Hutchins was still who she was: a controlling, rule-focused person who saw the world in black and white. But she'd been forced to confront a reality that didn't fit her worldview, and it had shaken something loose in her. Maybe she'd grow from it. Maybe she wouldn't. But at least she'd acknowledged her mistake. The next HOA board meeting was 2 weeks later. I attended, along with about 50 other residents. Patricia Hutchins was there, looking somewhat diminished in a way I'd never seen before. She opened the meeting by announcing her resignation as president and recommending that Robert Kaufman, the man whose heart attack I'd responded to months earlier, take over the role. The board voted unanimously to approve. Then Patricia proposed the new covenant amendment. It was simple and straightforward. Any resident who was a certified emergency medical responder or emergency services provider, working in coordination with local, state, or federal emergency services, would be exempt from noise ordinances and home-based business restrictions when responding to or preparing for emergency situations. The exemption would require documentation of credentials and coordination with official emergency services, but once approved, it would be permanent and unappealable. The board voted 5-0 to approve the amendment, pending a vote of the full community at the annual meeting in 3 weeks. At that meeting, the amendment passed with 83% of voting homeowners in favor. It was now part of the Pinewood Ridge HOA covenants, permanently protecting my ability to do my job. In the months that followed, life returned to something approaching normal. The calls kept coming and I kept responding. The dirty looks and nasty notes stopped. Some neighbors who'd avoided me started waving again when they saw me. A few even stopped by to apologize for believing the worst about me. Patricia Hutchins and I weren't friends exactly, but we developed a mutual respect. She moved on from the HOA presidency and focused her energy on other things. I heard she got involved with the County Emergency Services Committee, working on improving rural emergency response across the region. Maybe nearly dying had given her a new perspective on what mattered. The special assessment was never implemented, so the other homeowners didn't have to pay $500 each. The HOA's legal fees were paid from existing reserves, and while it put a dent in the budget, the community recovered. More importantly, the amendment protecting emergency responders became a model that other mountain HOAs started adopting. Jennifer Walsh told me that several communities had contacted her asking for copies of our covenant language, wanting to implement similar protections. On a cold night in late February, almost exactly 1 year after Patricia Hutchins had first knocked on my door with her clipboard, I got called out for another emergency. A child with a high fever and possible meningitis. I grabbed my gear, jumped on my Snowmachine, and raced through the snow. The ride took 7 minutes. The little girl was burning up with fever, lethargic and showing signs of serious infection. I stabilized her, administered fever reducers, and kept her safe until the helicopter arrived to transport her to Children's Hospital in Denver. As I was packing up, I looked out the window and saw Patricia Hutchins' car parked down the street. My heart sank for a moment, thinking she was back to her old habits. But then she got out of the car, walked over to where I was standing, and handed me a thermos. "Coffee," she said. "I figured you'd be cold. I was listening to my scanner when the call came in, and I thought you might need this when you were done." I took the thermos, genuinely surprised. "Thank you. How's the child? She'll be okay. They'll take good care of her at the hospital." Patricia nodded. "You do good work, Mr. Lawson. This community is lucky to have you." She walked back to her car and drove away, leaving me standing there with a thermos of hot coffee in my hands, watching the snowflakes fall in the glow of my Snowmachine's headlights. It wasn't a perfect ending. The world still had its problems, and HOAs would still do ridiculous things, and people would still clash over rules and principles. But this particular fight was over. I'd won the right to do my job, to help people who needed help, to be the emergency responder this mountain community needed. And on this cold February night, with a little girl on her way to the hospital and a thermos of coffee warming my hands, that felt like enough. I finished packing my equipment, started up my snow machine, and headed home through the snow, the engine's roar echoing through the quiet streets of Pinewood Ridge. Somewhere in those houses, people were sleeping peacefully, safe in the knowledge that if something went wrong, if disaster struck in the middle of the night, someone would come. Someone who knew what to do. Someone with a snow machine and a medical kit and the training to save their lives. That someone was me, and I'd fought hard to keep doing it. I'd stood up to an HOA that tried to fine me into submission, faced down legal threats and community pressure, and come out the other side still doing the work that mattered. The work of showing up when people needed help. The work of running toward emergencies while others ran away. The work of being a paramedic in a place where minutes could mean the difference between life and death. As I pulled into my garage and shut down the snow machine, I thought about everything that had happened. The fines and the hearings and the conflict. Patricia Hutchins and her clipboard and her crusade against my snow machine. The frightened faces of patients in crisis. The grateful tears of family members. The moment when Patricia herself had been gasping for air, and I'd had to put aside everything she'd done and just focus on saving her life. Because that was the job. That was what it meant to be an emergency responder. I went inside, drank Patricia's coffee, which was actually pretty good, and sat down at my kitchen table. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Thompson. It was a photo of her daughter, now 3 months old, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Emma is doing great. Thank you again for everything." I smiled and sent back a quick response. Then I checked the weather forecast for tomorrow. More snow coming in, which meant more potential emergencies, more calls in the middle of the night, more rides on my snow machine through the dark and the cold. But now, I could do it without worrying about fines or legal threats or HOA presidents with clipboards. The covenant amendment was in place. The legal case was closed. The community had spoken, and they'd chosen to value emergency response over noise complaints. It had taken a crisis to get there, and it shouldn't have been necessary, but we'd arrived at the right place eventually. I finished the coffee and headed to bed, my radio on the nightstand beside me, ready for the next call. Because there would always be a next call. Someone would fall, or have chest pain, or go into labor, or stop breathing. And when that happened, when the radio crackled to life at 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning or any time at all, I'd grab my gear and go. Sometimes by truck, sometimes by snow machine, but always ready, always prepared to help. That was my job. That was my purpose. And now, finally, after months of fighting and stress and uncertainty, I could do it without interference. I could be the emergency responder this community needed, the first line of defense when disaster struck, the person who showed up when minutes mattered. Patricia Hutchins and her HOA had tried to stop me, had tried to reduce my life-saving work to a noise violation and a series of fines. But in the end, reality had won out over bureaucracy. Human life had trumped property values, and the right to respond to emergencies had been protected. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the people I'd helped over the years. The heart attacks and the broken bones, the allergic reactions and the difficult births, the falls and the strokes and the countless other emergencies that had brought me racing through the snow to someone's door. Each one of those people mattered. Each one of those lives had value. And protecting my ability to reach them, to help them, to save them when I could, that was worth fighting for. The HOA had demanded I stop using my snow machine at night, unaware that I was the only emergency responder in the area. They'd learned that lesson the hard way, when one of their own leaders had needed that Snowmachine to save her life. And now the rules were different, changed to reflect the reality that some things were more important than noise, complaints, and property values. Some things, like the ability to save a life, transcended the petty concerns of homeowners associations and their covenants. I'd won this fight, but more importantly, the community had won. They now had explicit protection for emergency services, ensuring that future responders wouldn't face the same obstacles I'd faced. The amendment we'd created would help people for years to come, maybe decades. That was worth all the stress and conflict. That was worth standing up to Patricia Hutchins and her fines and her threats. That was worth fighting for. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Pinewood Ridge in silence. My Snowmachine sat in the garage, ready for the next emergency. And I slept peacefully, knowing that when that emergency came, I could respond without fear, without hesitation, without worrying about some HOA president with a clipboard documenting violations. I could just do my job, just help people, just be what this mountain community needed me to be. And that, after everything, was exactly enough.